The first thing I noticed was the man standing too close behind me on the platform, close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke on his coat and hear the hitch in his breathing when the tunnel lights flickered. Chicago after midnight doesn't feel like a city. It feels like a warning. Every exhausted face waiting for the last train looks like it could be a witness or a threat, depending on what kind of life you're living. I kept my shoulders loose, like I was just another waitress heading home. I kept my eyes on the arrivals board, not on him, not on the dark gaps between pillars where someone could step out and change everything. I'm not paranoid. Paranoid people invent danger. I learned to recognize it when it's real, when it has a name, a smile, and paperwork filed in triplicate. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen was cracked, the case cheap, the whole thing held together by stubbornness. I pulled it out anyway, because the phone is how I keep my world small. School alerts, work schedule, a picture of Noah with frosting on his lip. A news notification slid across the top of the screen. Cole Capital announces strategic partnership with Russo Holdings. For a second the words didn't land. Then they did, and my stomach dropped so hard I tasted metal. Ethan Cole, Dominic Russo. Ethan wasn't just my ex. He was the man who took my work and taught the world to doubt my name. He erased me so neatly that even I started questioning whether I deserved to exist outside the version of the story he told. I scrolled, reading too fast. Strategic, expansion, investment, the glossy language that turns lives into bullet points. But underneath it was the same brutal truth. Ethan was reaching for Dominic Russo's power. Dominic Russo was a name you didn't say out loud in my neighborhood. I'd heard it whispered at the restaurant by men who watched the doors too often. I'd heard it at school pickup when parents warned each other about which streets to avoid. And somehow, my past had just shaken hands with his world. The train screamed into the station. People shifted forward. I didn't. My fingers went numb around the phone as if my body was trying to drop it without my permission. I'd been telling myself a story for 2 years. That if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, invisible enough, the past would lose interest. That if I didn't use my real resume, if I didn't correct anyone's assumptions, if I smiled and carried plates and took whatever shifts I could get, I could keep Noah safe. Noah, 6 years old, too smart for his own good. The kid who looks back at me every morning before he steps into his classroom like he's checking that I'm still there. The kid who believes I can fix anything, even when I'm barely holding myself together. I thought the worst thing Ethan could do had already happened. I remembered the day he walked into our office with a folder like a gift. The day he talked about restructuring and risk and responsibility while my name quietly disappeared from documents I helped write. The day he turned my talent into his proof and my trust into my weakness. He didn't hit me. He didn't scream. He smiled, and he made sure every door closed politely in my face. That kind of betrayal doesn't end when you leave. It follows. It waits. It grows. Behind me, the man with the cigarette smell shifted again. My pulse spiked, sharp. I forced myself not to turn around. I refused to give fear the satisfaction of owning my head. Then he stepped with the crowd and disappeared into the train car without looking at me. Relief hit too late. My knees felt loose. I hated that my body still reacted like this, like Ethan had trained my nervous system the way he trained investors to trust him. I tucked the phone into my coat pocket and picked up my bag. The simple motions mattered. Move like you belong. Move like you're not running. Move like you aren't thinking about who might be watching. On the escalator up to street level, my phone vibrated again. Unknown number. My thumb hovered. Every part of me wanted to keep walking and pretend it didn't exist. But fear is only useful when you can see it clearly, so I tapped the notification. The message opened, and the screen displayed 4 words that stole the air from my lungs. I know where your son goes to school. The station lights felt too bright. The sidewalk felt too exposed. I saw Noah's little backpack with the frayed zipper. I saw his small hand in mine. I saw the exact spot outside his classroom where he always pauses to wave. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. Ethan, my mind said, because it had to be him. Then the headline flashed again behind my eyes, and another name settled in my bones like ice. Russo. If Ethan was aligning himself with Dominic Russo, and someone was already circling my child, then my careful invisibility wasn't protection anymore. It was a target painted in invisible ink. I forced my feet to keep moving. I kept my face blank, the way you do when you're in public and you can't afford to break. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't give the night anything it could use against me. But inside, something old and furious woke up. The woman I used to be, before Ethan convinced the world I was disposable, before I learned to live smaller than my own shadow. And to understand why that message broke me, you have to go back to last night, to the restaurant, to the moment I made the mistake of being kind to the wrong woman at the wrong table. Last night started like every other shift I'd survived by shrinking myself. La Stella sat in the Gold Coast. Warm light pooled under crystal fixtures. Marble floors swallowed footsteps. Wine glasses flashed like mirrors of money. The air smelled like truffle butter and clean linen, and the kind of certainty that comes from never checking your account. I wore the same black uniform as the other servers, but I moved like I was trying not to leave a mark. Head down, smile practiced, voice soft, eyes scanning, not for gossip, but for risk. After Ethan, I learned there are two kinds of attention. The kind that makes you feel safe, and the kind that makes you feel hunted. Megan ran the floor with her clipboard and her tight smile. I refilled sparkling water, cleared plates that cost more than my weekly groceries, and kept my pace steady because steady meant invisible, and invisible meant Noah got breakfast without me doing math in the dark. That's what hiding really is. It isn't dramatic, it's routine. It's choosing the safest path through every room. It's swallowing pride so your kid can sleep without hearing you break. A little after 7, the energy changed. I didn't hear an announcement. I felt it in the way conversations dipped, in the way shoulders straightened, in the way Megan's posture snapped into something like respect. Dominic Russo had arrived. I'd only heard the name, always lowered, always careful. But the moment he stepped inside, I understood the caution. He wasn't loud, he wasn't trying, he just carried authority like it belonged to his bones. Dark coat, controlled movements, eyes that checked the room like a perimeter. And beside him was a woman who softened the whole picture. Sophia Russo was small and silver-haired, wrapped in a cream scarf. Her expression held that rare kind of elegance you can't buy, the kind earned through time and grief and still choosing tenderness. Dominic guided her with a hand near her elbow, not gripping, just present, protective, without turning her into property. That alone made my chest tighten, because I'd spent years watching men use protection as a leash. They were seated in a corner with a view of the room. I tried to avoid that section, the way I avoided anything that could drag me into a story, but my station line curved that way anyway. I approached with water, with my polite professional mask. Dominic barely glanced at me. His attention stayed on the menu, on the room, on whatever calculations lived behind his eyes. Sophia looked up and met my gaze like she was seeing a person, not a uniform. I set the glasses down and started to step back, but her hand lifted in a small motion. Not a wave, not a snap, something careful, like she was asking permission to be heard. I froze, because I recognized it. Sign language had been a year of my life back when my world still had room for learning. It started as an elective and became a refuge, a language built on honesty. Hands don't fake warmth the way mouths can. Sophia's fingers moved again, tentative. Another server nearby offered that polite smile people use when they don't know what else to do. The one that says, "I see you, but I won't step closer." Megan was across the room, watching for mistakes and timing. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with the sting of watching someone get dismissed because communicating takes effort. So I stepped forward. My hands lifted, and the motions came back like muscle memory. I greeted Sophia in sign, simple and respectful, asking what she needed. Her face transformed. It was like a light turned on behind her eyes. She signed back quickly, relieved and excited, telling me she'd been trying to compliment the salmon, that it reminded her of something she ate in Naples years ago, that food could carry memory like a song. I smiled for real. Not the waitress smile, the human one. I signed that I would tell the chef and asked if she wanted to know what herbs were used. She laughed silently and signed that I was spoiling her. The exchange was small, but it felt huge. It felt like offering a door instead of a wall. Around us, the restaurant quieted in a way I didn't notice until later. At the time, all I saw was Sophia's joy and the relief of being understood. Then I felt Dominic shift. I sensed him standing before I actually looked. When I turned, his gaze was locked on my hands, on my face, on how natural the conversation was. It wasn't the lazy appraisal I'd seen from rich men. It was sharper, curious, almost irritated, like a missing detail in his world had just appeared. Heat climbed my neck. One moment of kindness, and I'd forgotten the first rule of survival. Do not show what you can do. Competence makes people ask questions. Questions make people dig. Digging leads to Noah. Sophia signed again, slower now, her expression soft. She told me most people treated her like an inconvenience when they realized she couldn't hear. They smiled and nodded and moved on. She said it meant something to have someone actually communicate, not just perform politeness. My throat tightened. I signed back that it mattered to me too, that being understood wasn't a luxury, it was a real need. And then my brain betrayed me. Sophia asked where I learned, and without thinking, I signed that I studied language formally, that I used to live in a world where words and meaning were my tools. The second the thought left my hands, panic hit. I tried to smooth it down, to make it sound small. I tried to pretend it didn't matter. Dominic's eyes narrowed. I could feel him putting pieces together that I'd spent 2 years scattering, the way I carried myself, the way I understood the wine list without looking, the way I didn't flinch when he arrived, because I'd been around power before and survived it. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at a story. I lowered my hands and reached for the water pitcher like an anchor. My pulse hammered. My mind raced through exits, excuses, distractions. Sophia watched us with a knowing little smile, then signed something playful, something that made her eyes sparkle like she was enjoying a private joke at my expense. I didn't translate it out loud. I just felt the weight of it, like she'd spotted the woman I was hiding. I stepped away, trying to disappear back into the rhythm of plates and orders, but I couldn't undo what had just happened, because Dominic Russo was still watching me, and the way he watched didn't feel like hunger. It felt like intention. I tried to slip back into my route like nothing had happened, but the room wouldn't let me. The air had changed, not louder, tighter, like someone had pulled a string through the dining room. I could feel eyes on me as I cleared plates and reset silverware. People weren't staring openly. They were watching the way powerful people watch when they're deciding what something is worth. I told myself it was one strange moment, and then life would go back to normal. But normal was a luxury I didn't have. Normal required nobody remembering my name. Across the room, Dominic Russo sat perfectly still, but I kept catching the edge of his gaze. It moved in short, deliberate sweeps, like he was taking inventory. When it landed on me, it didn't slide away. It held. I stayed busy. Water refills, bread baskets, the practiced smile. But my body was betraying me, reacting in ways I didn't want to name. A flare of heat, a pull in my chest, then fear, sharp enough to cut through it. Because attraction is harmless with a normal man. With him, it felt like stepping onto thin ice. Sophia Russo kept looking up at me with a soft warmth that made my throat ache. Every time her hands lifted, she signed something small and quick to Dominic, and her mouth curved like she was amused, not mocking, just pleased, in the way grandmothers get when they think they've spotted a story starting. I caught a fragment as I passed with a tray. Her teasing was gentle but obvious. Her son worked too much. Forgot real people existed, needed someone who would actually listen. Then her fingers flicked toward him like a nudge. My cheeks warmed. I translated it in my head into something safer, something that wouldn't turn her into a meddler. I nodded politely and stepped back before Dominic could ask the kind of question that would crack my cover wide open. A few minutes later, I had to return to their table. Sophia's face lit up, and she signed a quick question about the chef, about the herbs. I signed back that I'd pass it on, that I hadn't forgotten. Dominic's eyes dropped to my hands again. He watched the speed, the confidence, the way Sophia's shoulders loosened, as if language itself could soothe. Then his gaze lifted to my face, and I got the sickening feeling he was measuring me against my uniform. A waitress didn't usually sign like that. She didn't usually carry herself like she'd once belonged to rooms where the stakes were higher than dinner service. I hated that he was right. Sophia signed again, slower, with that mischievous lift of her brows. I could tell she was saying I should stop hiding behind my job. Then her hands angled toward Dominic like she was pushing the two of us together with a grin. I pulled my hands down and retreated, pretending I had other tables. My pulse wouldn't slow. My mind kept replaying the moment my fingers had moved without permission. The moment I'd admitted I studied language. The moment Dominic's attention sharpened into something dangerous. Megan brushed past me, pen tapping her clipboard, tracking timing and tips. She didn't look at me long enough to notice I was shaking. Then Dominic stood. No drama, no raised voice. He simply rose and stepped into my space, and my whole nervous system reacted like it recognized a threat. He didn't touch me, but the closeness felt like a hand anyway, blocking the easy path I would normally use to retreat. Somewhere behind him, Megan noticed. Her body went still the way it does when you see trouble forming. She started to move closer, ready to manage whatever scene she thought was coming, but she didn't get the chance. Dominic angled his head toward her and said something low. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the effect. Megan's face tightened. She nodded once, sharp and unwilling. Then she came to me wearing a smile that was too bright. She told me, in that manager tone that doesn't invite discussion, that I was cut for the night. My checkout would be handled. I should leave through the back. My heart slammed against my ribs. Being cut early should have felt like mercy. Instead, it felt like a door closing. I looked toward the kitchen hallway, toward the back corridor that led to the service exit. I'd used it 100 times, but suddenly it felt like a tunnel. Dominic moved like it was already decided. One of the men from a nearby table rose too, not crowding me, just existing in the background with quiet readiness, protection, control. The line between them blurred so easily it scared me. I wanted to tell Dominic he didn't get to rearrange my night. I wanted to tell him I wasn't his to manage. But Noah's face flashed behind my eyes, and so did my rent notice on the fridge. Pride doesn't pay bills. Pride doesn't keep a child safe. So I swallowed it. I gathered my things with hands that didn't feel like mine. I nodded at Megan as if I was grateful. I kept my face calm as I walked toward the back corridor, every step echoing with the awareness that Dominic Russo had made a decision about me. I didn't go straight home. I still had to clock out in the cramped staff nook where receipts stuck to the counter and dish soap hung in the air. Megan hovered, jaw tight, acting like she'd planned this. She slid my slip toward me and tapped the tip line with her pen, then shut her clipboard like she regretted it. I saw the number anyway. It was big, the kind that could cover groceries and a week of Noah's lunches. My first thought wasn't thanks. It was warning. Men like Dominic didn't leave money by accident. They left it like a marker, a quiet way to say he could reach me whenever he wanted, and I felt it deep inside. When the service door opened onto the cold alley, the city hit my lungs like a slap. I stepped out, and I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Because the worst part wasn't that he'd noticed me. It was that a part of me had noticed him back, and I didn't know which of us was more dangerous. By the time I reached the sidewalk, my phone felt heavy in my pocket, like it already knew the night wasn't finished with me. Back in the staff nook, the glamour of the dining room vanished. Fluorescent light, damp air, and the dishwasher's hum replaced chandeliers and violin music. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, so I pretended I was just cold. Megan's clipboard snapped shut. Her expression was the one she wore when she'd seen this movie before. She didn't make a scene, but the message was clear in the way she watched me. Men like Dominic Russo didn't do random kindness. They did power. They did leverage. They did things that came back later. I nodded like I was fine. I wasn't. When she slid my tip-out slip toward me, the number on the line made my throat tighten. $200. $200 for a dinner I barely served because I'd been cut early. I stared at it too long, like it might change if I blinked. $200 was groceries without counting pennies. It was Noah's winter boots that didn't leak. It was a little breathing room. Megan's eyes stayed on my face. I could feel her suspicion and her worry tangled together, like she wanted to protect me but didn't trust luck. She didn't have to say what she thought. Big tips came with rumors. Big tips came with expectations. Big tips came with men who believed they could buy access to you. I forced a smile and folded the slip like it was nothing. Inside, dread crawled up my spine. Relief bought by a powerful man was still a kind of debt. Outside, Chicago was slick with cold. The alley behind La Stella smelled like wet brick and trash, and the wind cut through my coat like it was personal. I walked fast but not frantic. I checked reflections in dark windows, not because I expected to see Dominic's men, but because my body didn't know how to stop scanning. On the platform, I stayed near other people. On the train, I chose a seat with my back to the wall. I held my bag close, fingers around the zipper like it could turn into a weapon if I believed hard enough. I hated living like this. But fear had become a routine as normal as brushing my teeth. Then my mind did what it always did when I started spiraling. It went straight to Noah. I pictured his serious little face, the way he pinched his brows when he tried to sound grown. I pictured his laugh, loud and bright, like he hadn't learned yet that the world could be cruel. I pictured him at school, turning back to wave one last time before he disappeared into the classroom. My apartment building always smelled faintly of fried food and bleach. The hallway lights flickered. The lock on my door stuck unless I lifted the handle just right. Inside, the radiator clicked, and the air held the day's stale warmth. I stood still for a moment and listened. Just ordinary quiet, the kind I never trusted. I padded into his bedroom. He'd fallen asleep sideways across the mattress like he'd fought sleep and lost. One sock hung off his toes. His hair stuck up in a way that would make him look like trouble in the morning. I brushed my knuckles over his cheek, light enough not to wake him, and my chest tightened with that familiar mix of love and fear. Every night I made him the same promise, even when I didn't know how to keep it. I promised he'd be safe. I promised I'd handle whatever came. In the kitchen, I stared into the fridge and realized I wasn't hungry. My body was running on adrenaline and habit. The $200 flashed in my head, and for a split second relief warmed me. Then it curdled. Relief bought by a powerful man was still a kind of debt. I went to my room and knelt by the bed. The floorboard creaked. I lifted the mattress just enough to slide out the lockbox hidden beneath. The metal was cold. The weight of it felt like my old life in my hands. Inside were the pieces of the person I used to be. A laminated ID badge from a company that pretended I never existed. A diploma with my full name spelled correctly, like proof I hadn't imagined being smart. A thin notebook packed with my handwriting, risk models, logic trees, the kind of work that used to make me feel powerful instead of small. A flash drive. A few documents I'd saved because some stubborn part of me still believed the truth mattered. I didn't pull anything out. I just looked until my eyes burned, then shut the lid like I was sealing away oxygen. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. My stomach tightened. I told myself to ignore it. I told myself boundaries were the only thing keeping me alive. But my thumb moved anyway. The message was polite on the surface. Gratitude for being kind to his mother. A note that she'd been smiling all the way home. Then the line that made my skin go cold. He said he'd gotten my number through the restaurant's channels because he wanted to thank me properly. He hadn't asked. He hadn't waited. He'd reached into my life like opening a drawer. Anger rose first, hot and clean. Then fear came right behind it, heavier, more practical. Men like Dominic Russo didn't get told no very often. Men like Dominic Russo didn't need permission to find you. I thought about Megan's warning. I thought about Ethan's calm voice the day he ruined me. The way he made betrayal sound reasonable. I thought about Noah's school calendar on my wall. The routine I depended on. The fragile normal I'd built out of careful choices. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A dozen responses formed in my head, sharp, brave, stupid. In the end, I typed nothing. I turned the phone face down like I could make it less real if I refused to look. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to my own heartbeat, steady and loud in the dark. My anonymity was cracking, and men like Ethan, and men like Dominic, didn't stop once they started prying. I barely slept. Not because I was wide awake the whole night, but because I never sank deep enough to forget where I was. Every creak of the building, every siren outside, every thud from a neighbor's door became a question my mind couldn't ignore. When morning finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a clock starting again. I got Noah ready the way I always did. Toothpaste on his shirt, a mismatched sock, a quick lunch packed from whatever I had left. He chattered about a spelling test and a kid in his class who made dinosaur noises, and I smiled at all the right moments while my brain ran in a separate lane, counting exits. After I dropped him off, I stood outside the school for a beat too long. The brick building looked ordinary. The playground looked safe. Parents looked tired and normal, but the text from last night had changed the way I saw everything. Someone knew where he went to school. Someone wanted me to know they knew. By the time I got to my second job errand and back, my phone had buzzed twice more. Same unknown number. The messages stayed polite, the kind that could pass as gratitude if you wanted to believe in harmless intentions. But there was an edge underneath, a quiet certainty that the conversation would happen whether I agreed or not. Then the third message landed like a finger pressing on a bruise I'd been hiding for years. Dominic told me to meet him at a campus. Not a cafe, not the restaurant. A campus. University of Chicago. My breath caught so hard it hurt. That place was a doorway I'd sealed shut. It was where I'd once walked with my head high, thinking my future was something I could build with talent and effort. It was where I'd believed I was becoming someone untouchable. Ethan had proven how wrong that was. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Meeting him there wasn't a coincidence. It was a statement. Dominic Russo didn't just want to thank me. He wanted to see where I came from. He wanted to confirm whatever he suspected. My first instinct was to run, pack a bag, pull Noah out of school, take the bus to a friend 2 states away, change my number, change my name again, start over. I'd done it before. I could do it again. But the moment I pictured Noah asking why, his small hand in mine, his trust like a weight I didn't deserve to drop, I knew running wasn't as simple as it sounded. Running cost money. Running cost stability. Running cost pieces of him I couldn't afford to break. And there was something else. Something uglier. If Dominic had already found me through the restaurant, disappearing now would only confirm I was hiding something worth chasing. Men with power didn't stop when you ran. They followed. So I did the only thing that felt like control. I chose to show up on my terms. I picked Noah up from school like nothing was wrong, kept my voice light through homework time, made him dinner, got him into bed early with a story he'd heard 100 times. Then I stared at my closet like it contained the answer to who I was allowed to be. In the end, I wore something simple and clean, not Waitress black, not corporate armor, just a dark sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, face bare. If Dominic wanted to see me, he was going to see what I really looked like when I wasn't performing for tips. The next day, the campus looked almost the same as I remembered. Stone buildings, leafy paths, students moving with that careless confidence I used to carry before life taught me what confidence costs. I stood at the edge of the quad and felt a sharp, unexpected ache. Not nostalgia exactly, more like grief for the woman I'd been when I thought success would protect me. Dominic was already there. He sat on a low stone wall like he belonged to the place, casual in dark jeans and a heavy coat that probably cost more than my rent. He held 2 coffee cups, and the way he looked up when he saw me made my pulse jump. Not because he was handsome, though he was. Because his attention felt like a spotlight. Daylight should have made him less intimidating. Somehow it did the opposite. In the restaurant, the shadows softened him. Out here? He looked sharper, more real, a man who didn't need darkness to be dangerous. I approached slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't smile too wide. I didn't give him any opening to think I was eager. He stood with that same controlled grace, like he was aware of every angle, every exit, every person who might be watching. He handed me one of the coffees without hesitation, like the decision had already been made. I took it because refusing would have been a scene, and scenes attract attention. For a moment, we were just 2 people on a campus, holding coffee, pretending this was normal, but my body knew better. Dominic's eyes moved over me in a way that wasn't crude. It was careful. The way someone looks when they're trying to match a face to a file. I hated how exposed I felt. I hated how a part of me wanted him to see me anyway. He said something about how easy it was to notice details when you spent your life reading rooms. I didn't need to hear the exact words to feel the point. He'd been watching me, collecting evidence. He mentioned the way I signed with his mother, the way I understood her humor, the way I carried myself around expensive people without flinching, the way I corrected a mispronounced word under my breath without meaning to. Each detail felt like a pin sliding into place. He wasn't guessing. He was building a case. I kept my face calm, but inside I was running through options. Lie, deny, deflect, admit just enough to satisfy him without giving him Noah. I chose the middle path, because it was the only one that didn't feel like surrender. In my head, I told him a version of the truth. I let myself say I used to have a different career. I let myself admit life didn't go the way I planned. I didn't say the words co-founder or stolen work or public humiliation. I didn't say the word engagement, because that would open a door I couldn't close. But I did say something about betrayal. Something about someone who took what wasn't his. I felt my own voice shake in my memory as I confessed that much, and I hated it. I hated how easily my past could still crack me open. Dominic didn't react like most men would. He didn't pity me. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't look away. He just watched, absorbing, like he was hearing the truth in the spaces between what I wouldn't say. Then he did the thing that froze my blood. He spoke Ethan's name, Ethan Cole. He said it like it was a fact he already knew, not a name he'd just guessed. My grip tightened on the coffee until the heat bit my palm. The world tilted slightly, like my body was trying to step back in time to the moment before that name came out of his mouth. Because there were only a few ways Dominic Russo could know Ethan Cole, and none of them were safe for me. When Dominic said Ethan Cole, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was that hollow, nauseating drop in my stomach, like the floor had quietly been removed. My hands went cold. The coffee cup felt too heavy. The campus around us blurred for a second, and I had to focus on the sound of students laughing in the distance, just to stay present. Ethan's name wasn't just a memory. It was a trigger, a file folder, a courtroom hallway I never stepped into because the charges were dropped, a bank account that had been mine until it wasn't, a ring I'd thrown into a kitchen trash can and then fished out again because I couldn't believe it was real. I forced myself to breathe. I didn't give Dominic the satisfaction of watching me break. Inside, though, my mind was already racing through the worst possibilities. Dominic could be bait. Ethan could be using him. Dominic could be using me. Or they could be circling the same target and I'd just walked into the middle like an idiot. I had spent 2 years teaching myself to keep my face neutral, to swallow fear, to answer questions with half-truths that didn't leave fingerprints. So I stood there and let my eyes stay steady while my heart tried to punch its way out of my chest. Dominic didn't smirk. He didn't push immediately. If anything, he went still, like he was watching my reaction with the careful patience of someone who didn't need to force answers. He explained, in that controlled way of his, that Ethan Cole wasn't only a name from my past. Ethan Cole was on his radar right now. Cole Capital was moving into a partnership track with Russo Holdings. Not a rumor, not a headline. A real negotiation, a deal with weight. The words landed slowly, each one heavier than the last. I'd seen the notification on the train platform, but hearing it from Dominic made it feel less like news and more like a trap closing. Ethan wasn't drifting through my life again by accident. He was aligning himself with power, with Dominic's kind of power, and Dominic was standing right in front of me, holding the string. I wanted to laugh. Not because anything was funny, because of how ridiculous the universe could be. I'd worked myself down to invisibility, took late-night shifts, lived in a cramped apartment, clipped coupons, built my life around Noah's safety, and it still wasn't enough to escape Ethan. My thoughts flashed back to Ethan's smile the last time I'd believed him, the way he talked about protecting us while he rewrote documents, the way he framed my questions as instability, the way he turned my insistence on credit into greed. Ethan didn't just steal my work. He stole my credibility. He built his success on my silence. Dominic watched me, and I could tell he was trying to place the moment his curiosity turned into certainty. He admitted, without softening it, that he hadn't known about any personal connection at first. He'd noticed I didn't fit, that I spoke and moved like someone who'd lived a different life, that my fluency with his mother wasn't something you picked up casually. So he did what men like him do when something doesn't add up. He investigated. My anger flared, hot and immediate. I wanted to tell him he had no right. I wanted to tell him my life wasn't a puzzle for him to solve. But my fear of Ethan was bigger than my pride, and Dominic could see it. He didn't ask me to trust him in some sweet, romantic way. He didn't promise he was different. He offered something colder, something I hated because it worked. A test. He said he could contact Ethan under business pretense, bring up a person from the University of Chicago with a language background, someone who claimed to know him. Then we'd watch Ethan's reaction. Not what he said. How he said it. The pause. The deflection. The pattern. My stomach twisted. The idea of hearing Ethan's voice again made my skin crawl. But the truth was, Dominic was right about one thing. Ethan's greatest weapon had always been control. He controlled rooms. He controlled narratives. He controlled the story people believed about me. If Dominic could see Ethan lie with his own eyes, it would matter. So I nodded once, barely, like I didn't care, like I wasn't terrified. Dominic pulled out his phone and made the call with the same calm he probably used to order dinner. He kept his expression neutral while he spoke, and I listened to the cadence of the conversation through the shape of Dominic's face rather than the words. I heard just enough from Dominic's side to understand the setup. A casual mention of someone with my name, my background, my connection. And then Dominic went quiet, listening. The silence stretched. My throat tightened. I recognized that silence. The moment Ethan calculated the safest lie, Dominic's eyes flicked to mine, quick and sharp. Then he looked away again, as if he didn't want Ethan to hear the change in his breathing. When Dominic finally responded, his voice stayed even. He sounded like a man asking an ordinary business question, not like someone holding a live wire. When he ended the call, he didn't move for a moment. He just stared at the screen like it had insulted him. I didn't need him to repeat the details. I could read the outcome in his jaw. Ethan denied knowing me. Not hesitantly, not with confusion. Smoothly. Like my name meant nothing. Like I was a stranger who'd borrowed a story. And worse, he'd turned it around the way he always did. He'd warned Dominic to be careful of people claiming connections. He'd implied women used fake stories to get close to successful men. He'd painted me as a potential con artist without ever having to say my name like it mattered. Even after everything, he could still erase me in one breath. My vision blurred for a second, not from tears, but from rage. Rage and humiliation knotted together in my chest so tightly it hurt. My hands shook, and I shoved them into my coat pockets so Dominic wouldn't see how badly it still affected me. I hated that Ethan could still do this to me. I hated that he could deny years like they were nothing, I hated the part of me that still wanted to scream my truth until the world had no choice but to listen. Dominic looked at me then, and something in his expression shifted. Not pity, not doubt. Something closer to disgust directed at Ethan, not at me. He didn't say he believed me like it was a romantic gesture. He said, in his own way, that the call didn't sit right, that Ethan's reaction wasn't normal, that the lie was too clean. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made my fear sharpen. Because if Dominic Russo decided Ethan Cole was a liar, this wasn't going to be a simple business disagreement. This was going to be a collision. And in collisions like that, people like me didn't just get hurt. Our kids did. I stared out across the campus, at the students walking like the world was safe, and I realized the question wasn't whether I could trust Dominic. It was how I was supposed to protect Noah if Ethan and Dominic both pulled on my life at the same time. And somewhere deep inside, under the fear, a colder thought formed. If Dominic moved next, my life wouldn't be mine to steer anymore. The moment Dominic decided Ethan's lie mattered, I felt my instincts kick into gear like a fire alarm. Run. It was the oldest reflex I had left. Run before the trap finishes closing. Run before Noah becomes a bargaining chip. Run before two powerful men turn my life into a battlefield. My brain started listing options like it had done 100 times in the past 2 years. Cash on hand. A friend in Milwaukee I hadn't called in months. A spare key hidden under a loose brick. Which documents in the lockbox mattered most? How long it would take to pull Noah out of school without raising questions? Then reality snapped in. Running would take time. Running would take money I didn't have. Running would take Noah away from the only stability he'd known since everything fell apart. And if Ethan had already started watching him, if he was already using fear like a hook, then running could turn into the exact kind of chaos Ethan thrived on. Dominic didn't argue with my panic. He didn't tell me to calm down. He just offered his solution like it was the only one that mattered. Protection. He didn't say it sweetly. He didn't frame it like romance. He laid it out the way men like him lay out anything, as a plan with logistics, security, and rules. I felt my spine stiffen. Because protection from a man like Dominic Russo was never free. But the thought of Noah being watched made my pride feel small and useless. By the time I left the campus, the decision felt less like mine. Dominic's people appeared the way shadows appear when the sun moves. A car that was suddenly there. A driver who didn't introduce himself because he didn't need to. A route that avoided main streets without anyone explaining why. I told myself I was still choosing. I told myself I was doing this for Noah. Both things were true, and neither of them made me feel better. The safe house wasn't some dramatic fortress. That would have been easier to hate. It was worse because it looked almost normal. A renovated townhouse tucked on a quiet street near the edge of Lincoln Park. The kind of place you'd assume belonged to a lawyer or a tech executive. Neat landscaping. A front porch light glowing soft and warm. Curtains drawn just enough to feel private. Only the details betrayed it. The cameras mounted discreetly under the eaves. The gate latch that clicked with a coded lock. The way the man at the corner didn't look like security until you realized he hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Inside, everything was calm, in a way that made my skin itch. Clean, minimal. The air smelled faintly of lemon and expensive soap. There were no family photos, no clutter, no evidence of a life unfolding. It felt like a place designed for waiting. A gilded cage still counts as a cage. Dominic walked me through it like he was showing me a hotel suite, not a controlled environment. He pointed out the kitchen, the bedroom, the extra room that could fit a kid. He mentioned routines the way you might mention the weather. Doors locked at night. Visitors cleared. Phones handled carefully. School pickup adjusted. Rules. My jaw tightened. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I wasn't a prisoner. But then my mind replayed that text again, the one that knew Noah's school, and my voice died in my throat. Noah wasn't with me yet. Dominic had insisted he would be moved carefully, quietly, without panic. The idea of strangers handling my child made my chest ache, but the alternative, me dragging him through the city in fear, felt worse. So I nodded and swallowed my anger until it burned. The first time I noticed the locks, I told myself it was temporary. The second time, I realized every door in the place locked from the inside and the outside. I walked into the living room and stared out the window at the street. The glass was thick. The view was clear. The feeling was not. Dominic stood behind me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his presence like heat. I hated that it steadied me. I hated that relief crept in alongside fear, like my body was grateful to stop carrying everything alone. That gratitude scared me more than the cameras. Later, when Sophia Russo arrived, she didn't come in like a queen. She came in like someone who had learned how to soften sharp rooms. She wore a knit cardigan and carried a small bag that looked like it belonged to a grandmother visiting family. She smiled at me like we were already connected, like the restaurant wasn't our first meeting, just the first time I'd let myself be seen. Her hands lifted, and she signed. She asked how I was holding up. The question hit harder than anything Dominic had said, because it was simple, because it was human, because no one had asked me that with real care in a long time. I signed back that I didn't know, that I felt like my life was tipping again, that my child was the only thing keeping me upright. Sophia's expression softened, and she signed something that made my throat tighten, that children were anchors, and anchors could also be wings if you protected them right. She moved around the house with comfort, like it belonged to her too. She pointed out a shelf stocked with kid snacks, a basket of toys that looked freshly purchased, not loved yet. She made a face that clearly said her son tried too hard to be prepared, and still forgot what real life felt like. It was the first time I smiled since the train platform. Then the smile faded when I noticed the men. Not guards in uniform, men in plain clothes who kept their distance, who spoke into earpieces like it was normal, the way they watched entrances, the way they stood near Dominic without looking like they were there for him. I'd grown up believing safety meant freedom. Here, safety meant surveillance. I realized in a quiet, sinking way that Dominic's world wasn't clean. He ran businesses, yes. He wore nice clothes, sat in fine restaurants, spoke in calm voices, but underneath that was an engine built on leverage and fear. A code, maybe. A structure. A way of doing things that didn't rely on law to keep order. It didn't mean he was evil. It meant he was dangerous. Sophia signed again, teasing now, telling me I looked like I wanted to bite her son, and thank him at the same time. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, and my hands fumbled the response because she wasn't wrong. Dominic watched us from the doorway, unreadable. I could feel him measuring my reactions, not to manipulate me, but to understand what I needed. That should have felt comforting. Instead, it made me feel owned. When the evening settled, and the house fell into a quiet that felt too controlled, I stood in the guest room and stared at the neatly made bed. I could hear the soft click of a lock somewhere down the hall. I could hear a murmur of voices through the wall, men coordinating my safety like it was a business asset. I pressed a hand to my chest and tried to slow my breathing. I told myself Noah would be safer here. I told myself this was temporary, but lying to myself didn't change the truth I could feel in my bones. I might be safer from Ethan tonight, but I was officially inside Dominic Russo's rules. And the worst part was the quiet, shameful thought I couldn't admit out loud. A part of me didn't want to leave. Dominic didn't let the safe house feel like a prison by talking about it that way. That was the trick. He treated it like the most logical thing in the world. Like safety was a service he could provide the way other men provided flowers or apologies. That calmness should have made me furious. Instead, it made me tired. The next morning, I woke up to silence that wasn't normal silence. It was controlled silence. The kind that exists when people are paid to make sure nothing unexpected happens. I found Noah's little sneakers lined up neatly near the door of the spare room. Brand new, the same size he wore. Like someone had bought them without asking because they already knew. My throat tightened. I didn't want gifts. I wanted my son safe with his life still feeling like his. Dominic was already up, dressed like he'd stepped out of a magazine even at breakfast hour. Not flashy, just expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself. He had papers spread across the kitchen island, a tablet, a legal pad with neat writing. The whole scene looked like business, because it was. He didn't present it as revenge for me. He presented it as due diligence for him. Like Ethan Cole was a risk to his empire and I was the evidence he hadn't expected. He walked me through the deal without turning it into a lecture. I could read the stakes in the way he paused before certain points, in the way his eyes sharpened when he mentioned expansion. Ethan wanted access. Money flows. Legitimacy. Dominic's world and Ethan's world were negotiating a bridge built on my stolen work. I sat at the counter and forced myself to focus, because panic wouldn't help Noah. Competence might. Dominic showed me a file on the tablet. Investor materials. Technical summaries. A glossy overview of Ethan's so-called proprietary risk engine. I didn't need to read long to feel something in my chest crack open. The writing style was different. The branding was different. Ethan's team had slapped new names on everything, like putting cheap paint over stolen wood. But the bones underneath were mine. I saw it in one specific place, one small choice most people would miss. A risk threshold rule I'd invented after a market shock years ago. A never again safeguard. I used to call it a breaker, like a circuit breaker in a house. If the signals got too perfect, too smooth, the model automatically slowed itself down. It was my defensive habit, my fingerprint, because I didn't trust markets that looked calm. Ethan's materials described it like it was genius. I could almost hear him taking credit in that warm, confident voice. My mouth went dry. Dominic watched my face and didn't interrupt. He waited like a man who understood that proof isn't only data. It's the moment someone recognizes their own soul in a stolen thing. I told him quietly that the rule wasn't common. It wasn't something you copied from a textbook. It came from a specific scar I carried. A specific day I watched models fail and decided mine wouldn't. Dominic nodded once, like he'd just watched the final piece click into place. Then he made a choice. Not a gentle romantic choice, a business choice with sharp edges. He started calling people. Legal, compliance. An investigator I didn't know by name but could tell by Dominic's tone that this person mattered. He talked about chain of custody, version history, patent records. He talked about inconsistencies like they were stains he intended to scrub out with force. My stomach twisted, because I knew what Ethan did when threatened. He didn't just defend himself. He destroyed the thing that threatened him, and Dominic was about to threaten him. I tried to tell myself Dominic could handle it. Men like him didn't get to be kings of a city by being fragile. But Noah's face kept cutting through every thought like a blade. Then the second spike hit. A man stepped into the kitchen doorway without knocking, dressed like someone who belonged in any neighborhood. He didn't look panicked. That's what made it worse. He spoke low to Dominic, and Dominic's expression shifted in a way that made my lungs tighten. Dominic kept his face controlled, but I saw the tension in his jaw. He told me, in the simplest language possible, that someone had been seen near Noah's school route. Not a parent, not a neighbor, a stranger lingering too long, a car that rolled past twice, a person asking a question that didn't belong. My vision narrowed. My body went cold, then hot, then cold again. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown. It was the kind of fear that turns your blood into ice because your child is involved. I pictured Noah walking out of school with his little backpack. I pictured a hand reaching. I pictured him turning around, confused, looking for me. My knees felt weak. Dominic's response was immediate, efficient, quiet. He didn't shout orders. He didn't make a show. He made calls, changed routes, moved pieces. He said Noah would not be picked up the same way. He said there would be eyes on the school. He said nobody would approach Noah without being known. He said it like a fact, like his will could reshape the day. And that's when the other fear hit. Relief. Because part of me wanted someone else to take the weight for a second. Part of me wanted to breathe. Part of me wanted to hand my terror to a man who could actually do something about it. I hated myself for that relief. Because relief came with strings. Dominic's men didn't just watch. They controlled. They set rules that didn't ask my opinion. They moved my life like it was a chessboard. I stood there gripping the counter, swallowing the urge to scream, and I realized something brutal. If Ethan was already circling Noah, then the war wasn't coming. It was here. And if Dominic and Ethan went to war, my child was going to be standing too close to the fire unless I stopped being someone who just survived. I looked at the tablet again. The stolen model, the polished lies, the fingerprints of my work underneath. Then I looked down the hall toward the room where Noah would sleep tonight, under a roof protected by cameras and men and a mafia boss who thought protection was an equation. I didn't want this life, but I wanted my son alive more than I wanted comfort. So I made a decision inside my chest that felt like swallowing glass. If Dominic was going to move pieces, I was going to be one of the hands on the board, because hiding didn't save me, and it sure as hell wasn't going to save Noah. After you live long enough with fear, your brain learns a trick. When panic rises, it offers you a place to stand. For me, that place has always been work. Not the kind of work where I carry plates and smile. The kind where my mind becomes sharp and clean, where numbers stop being threats and start being language. So when Dominic spread the technical packet across the kitchen island, something inside me clicked into that old gear. My hand stopped shaking. My breathing evened out. I leaned in like my life depended on it. Because it did. He'd pulled the risk engine documents from Cole Capital's data room. Not the glossy investor deck. The real stuff. Architecture notes, deployment schedules, a thin slice of audit logs, and enough code snippets to make my stomach twist. I told myself not to feel anything. I told myself I was just reviewing. But the moment my eyes landed on a line of pseudocode, I felt it like a bruise being pressed. Ethan had renamed the components, changed the comments, rewired the structure just enough to look original. He'd done what he always did. Taken something living and polished it into something that looked like it had only ever belonged to him. But the fingerprints were still there. They always are. I found the first one in a place nobody would ever notice unless they'd built the system from scratch. In the testing folder, there was a dataset label that made my chest go tight. Lake, Effect, 1. It was a stupid name I'd used years ago, back when I thought I'd be at that company forever. A private joke with myself about Chicago weather and market mood swings. I'd never bothered to change it because it was buried deep, not something clients would see. Ethan's team could have rebuilt the whole engine and still missed that little label. Because it wasn't an idea. It was me. I kept reading. Version histories, time-stamped artifact builds, dependency lists. The deeper I went, the more certain I became. The defensive threshold rule was mine. The internal naming style was mine. Even the way error handling was written, cautious and almost paranoid, was mine. I used to joke that my code had trust issues. Turns out it did, because I did. Dominic watched my face, and I could tell he was tracking the moment I stopped guessing and started knowing. Then he slid another file toward me. Not code, transactions. Rows and rows of transfers between entities with names that sounded like they were generated by a bored accountant. LLCs with addresses that repeated. Funds moving in and out in neat, almost elegant patterns. Profits that looked too clean. I didn't need Dominic to explain the implication. I'd spent enough time in finance to understand what too clean meant. Money doesn't move like that unless someone is trying to hide where it came from. My mouth went dry. I thought about Ethan's smile in boardrooms, the way he could talk about integrity while picking your pocket. I thought about the kind of people who would pay to wash dirty cash through a system that could disguise it as legitimate trading performance. I thought about Dominic. If Russo Holdings put its name on this partnership, if Dominic brought Ethan into his ecosystem, then Ethan wouldn't just be stealing from me again. He'd be putting Dominic's empire at risk. Worse, he'd be using Dominic as a shield. Dominic pointed out timing windows in the transfer patterns. They clustered around certain liquidity events, certain reporting periods. The numbers rose in a way that looked like growth but felt like choreography. I felt cold creep up my arms. This wasn't just fraud, it was infrastructure for something darker. And then the second discovery hit, sharper than the first. A backdoor. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't a single line that screamed sabotage. It was a subtle conditional buried in a routine that looked harmless. A tiny door hidden inside a wall that everyone assumed was solid. It triggered only when a specific sequence of inputs hit at the same time. A transfer threshold, a timing marker, a flag that should have been internal only. I stared at it so long my eyes burned. My brain tried to reject it because it meant Ethan had done more than steal. He'd weaponized. I recognized the original routine. I'd written it as a safety measure, a way to slow trades if volatility spiked. Ethan had threaded his own condition into it like a parasite. If the hidden trigger fired, the engine would do the opposite of what it was supposed to do. It would flood signals. It would distort risk. It could freeze accounts or create a cascade of false safe trades that would look legitimate until everything collapsed. I could see the headlines already. A partner system failure, a sudden freeze, investors furious, regulators swarming, and Dominic Russo's name in the center of it because he'd been the one ready to endorse the deal. My throat tightened. Ethan could burn Dominic to cover himself. He could trigger chaos during a money movement and blame the collapse on integration errors, on a flawed model, on an overconfident partner. And if Ethan could burn Dominic, he could burn me too, because Ethan never left witnesses alive in the public sense. He erased you, then blamed the smoke on your existence. I looked up and realized Dominic was watching me with a different kind of stillness now. Not curiosity, readiness. The kind that comes when a man understands he's not negotiating anymore. He's neutralizing a threat. I hated how calm he looked. I hated how my body leaned toward that calm like it was shelter. Dominic said something low to the man standing near the doorway, and the man nodded and left. More calls, more pieces moving. I wanted to tell Dominic to slow down. I wanted to tell him Ethan was dangerous when cornered. But Dominic didn't look like a man who needed warnings. He looked like a man who'd been born for corners. The kitchen felt smaller. The safe house felt less like protection and more like a command center. I pressed my palms to the counter and tried to steady myself. My mind kept bouncing between code and Noah, code and Noah, code and Noah, like those were the only two things left in the world. Before that moment, The work still felt like a problem I could solve with enough focus. I traced the audit logs, the way you follow footprints after fresh snow. There were gaps that shouldn't exist, timestamps too neat, as if someone scrubbed the mess with a clean rag. Deployment notes referenced hotfixes pushed outside the normal review chain. In a maintenance ticket, I saw an override requested at the executive level, approved with no questions, then vanished from the queue, and it made sense. Then Dominic's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, and the color drained from my face before he even spoke, because I recognized that pause. The pause that means the day just changed. He turned the phone so I could see. A grainy image. A school sidewalk. A familiar chain-link fence. And in the corner, Noah's bright backpack. Unmistakable. The one with the dinosaur patch I'd sewn on. Someone had taken the photo from across the street. Under it was a message from an unknown number that referenced Noah's dinosaur patch like it had been admired up close. Not a threat written in blood. Something worse. Something casual. A reminder that whoever sent it could watch my child and still have time to be smug about his favorite thing. My lungs stopped working for a second. The world narrowed to that image, that fence, that backpack. My son being observed like he was a weakness someone could exploit. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I felt something colder settle into my bones. Because now I understood the new rule. Ethan didn't just remember me. He had found me, and he wanted me to know it. The photo sat on Dominic's screen like a bruise you couldn't cover. Noah's backpack. The dinosaur patch I'd stitched on while he sat at the kitchen table telling me about planets. The chain-link fence outside his school. A blurry angle that still managed to feel intimate, like whoever took it had been close enough to notice the tiny things that made him mine. My body went numb first. Then the numbness snapped into heat, straight up my spine and into my throat, like my rage was trying to become sound. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared until my eyes burned and my vision started tunneling, because my brain was already doing what it always did when Noah was threatened. It started planning. Run. Change his school. Change my number. Pull cash. Disappear. I could feel that old survival checklist flipping through my head like index cards. I pictured grabbing the lockbox. I pictured stuffing clothes into a bag without folding. I pictured Noah half asleep in my arms while I carried him down the stairs and into the dark. For a few seconds, the urge to flee was so strong it felt like the only moral choice. A mother is supposed to run when danger comes for her child. Then the other truth hit. Harder. Running didn't erase danger anymore. It announced it. Ethan wasn't guessing. He wasn't searching. He'd found us. If he could get a photo that close to Noah's routine, he could follow us anywhere I tried to disappear to. And if Ethan had wired a backdoor into my stolen algorithm, then he wasn't just threatening me with gossip or paperwork. He was threatening chaos, blame, ruin, the kind of chaos where people get desperate and do ugly things to protect themselves. If I ran now, I might not be running away from Ethan. I might be running straight into his trap. Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't make promises dressed up as comfort. He watched my face the way he watched everything, carefully, like he was trying to figure out what would keep me functional. Then he moved, not physically toward me. Strategically, he made calls, quiet ones, the kind that didn't sound like panic, but still rearranged reality. He sent someone to the school area. He tightened whatever surveillance net he already had around Noah. He talked about routes and timing and eyes on doors like it was an equation he could solve faster than fear could spread. And while he did that, he laid out a different kind of plan. One that scared me because it wasn't a fantasy. It was practical. He wanted to force Ethan's hand. Not by threatening him directly, not by chasing him in the street, by using the one place Ethan felt safest, business. Dominic had leverage, due diligence rights, a partnership that Ethan wanted badly enough to lie for it. Dominic could demand an urgent meeting under the pretense of intellectual property verification and security review. He could request access to Ethan's technical lead, the one Ethan kept conveniently out of view. He could frame it as a deal condition, not a personal attack. And then came the part that made my stomach roll. Dominic wanted me in that room, not as the waitress Ethan had erased, not as the ex he could dismiss with a smile. As an independent technical consultant hired by Russo Holdings to verify the authenticity and safety of Ethan's so-called assets. My first reaction was pure refusal, instant and instinctive. I could feel my muscles tightening like I was about to back away from a ledge. Walking into Ethan's office felt like walking into a fire I'd barely survived once. I knew how Ethan handled confrontation. He didn't explode. He didn't lose control. He stayed calm and made you look unstable. He made the room doubt your tone, your motives, your sanity. He used paperwork like a weapon and charm like a smokescreen. If I stepped into his space again, he would try to do it all over. He would pretend he didn't recognize me. He would act like I was a stranger who'd mistaken his kindness for connection. He would frame me as a bitter employee, a liar, a woman using a story to get close to powerful men. And the worst part was that tactic worked. Not because people are evil, but because people love neat explanations. It's easier to believe a successful man than a woman with a complicated past. I told myself I couldn't do it, that Noah needed me alive, not brave, that I couldn't risk Ethan triggering something dangerous the moment he realized I was back. But Dominic didn't treat my fear like weakness. He treated it like information. He made it clear the meeting wouldn't be a public ambush. It would be controlled. Neutral ground, as much as anything in Ethan's world could be neutral. Dominic would bring counsel, documentation, financial compliance people. The kind of witnesses who didn't care about feelings, only proof. And Dominic's protection would be there too. Quiet and close, the way a shadow follows light. That last part should have comforted me. Instead, it made the hairs on my arms rise, because it reminded me how deep into Dominic's rules I already was. I paced the kitchen until my feet hurt. The safe house felt smaller than ever, not because of the walls, but because of the decision pressing in on me. I kept thinking about Noah, about the photo, about how whoever took it wanted me to freeze in place, to make the wrong move, to panic, to become predictable. Ethan loved predictable. He built his whole life on predicting people and then exploiting what they needed. Noah needed me steady. I went down the hallway and opened the spare room door. He was there now. Dominic's people had moved him quietly, safely, without drama. Noah slept curled on his side, one arm thrown over a pillow like he was hugging it. His lashes looked too long for a child who'd already seen too much change in his short life. I stood in the doorway and felt my chest tighten so hard it was almost pain. This was the reason I waited tables. This was the reason I swallowed insults and hid my education, and pretended I didn't know what a balance sheet was. This was the reason I lived small, so he could live big. I knelt beside the bed and smoothed his hair back with 2 fingers. He shifted, half awake, and his hand found mine in that unconscious way kids do when they trust you completely. He didn't open his eyes. He just held on. Something in me broke and reformed at the same time. I wasn't going to let Ethan keep rewriting our lives. Not again. I went back to the kitchen and stared at the spread of documents. Code traces, transaction patterns, the backdoor condition, the photo. I realized something that should have been obvious earlier. This couldn't be about whether people believed my story. It had to be about receipts. Facts Ethan couldn't charm away. So I started building a strategy that didn't depend on my pain. I made a list in my head of what would matter in that room. Metadata, timestamps, original dataset labels, commit history fingerprints, proof that the backdoor wasn't accidental, a clear explanation that any regulator could understand, stated in plain language, so Ethan couldn't hide behind jargon. I prepared for the gaslight in advance, not by rehearsing arguments, but by stripping emotion out of the core presentation. I could be furious later. In that meeting, I needed to be calm enough to make Ethan's calm look like what it was, a lie. Dominic watched me shift from fear into focus. I could feel his attention like pressure, not possessive, but assessing, as if he'd been waiting to see whether I would stand up or fold. I didn't like that he was watching. I liked even less that some part of me wanted his approval. When I finally looked at him, my voice felt steady in my head even if my hands still trembled under the counter. I agreed. Not because I trusted him completely, because I trusted the math of the situation, because I trusted what I'd seen in the code, because I trusted the photo on his phone and the cold certainty that hiding hadn't protected Noah. Dominic's expression didn't soften into romance. It hardened into readiness. The meeting would happen fast. The pressure would be framed as business urgency. Ethan would be forced to show his cards, and I would walk in as the person I used to be, the person I buried to survive. I glanced down the hallway again, toward Noah's room, and felt the fear settle into something sharper. Resolve. If Ethan wanted to drag my child into this, then Ethan was about to learn the one thing he never believed about me. I don't stay erased. And when I walked into his office, I wasn't walking in as a victim. I was walking in as a mother with proof in her hands and war in her heart. The glass tower that housed Cole Capital looked exactly like the kind of place Ethan always wanted to belong. Tall, clean, reflective. The lobby smelled like citrus and money, like someone had decided comfort should come with a signature scent. Everything echoed softly, as if even sound had been trained to behave. The first time I'd walked into a building like this with Ethan, I'd felt proud. Not because he was rich, but because I thought we were building something real together. I thought we were partners in the purest sense of the word. Now, stepping into this place with Dominic beside me, I felt my past trying to climb up my throat. My stomach twisted as we crossed the marble floor. My palms were damp. My heart beat too fast. But my posture stayed straight because I couldn't afford to look like prey. I wasn't wearing a suit. I wasn't trying to cosplay the old version of me. I wore simple professional clothes and carried a slim folder and a laptop bag like any consultant would. That was the point. I wasn't here to beg for my story back. I was here to verify assets. I repeated that in my head like a mantra as we approached security. Consultant, due diligence, evidence. Dominic moved through the lobby like the space belonged to him. Not in a loud way. In the way people moved aside without realizing they were doing it. His presence didn't ask permission. It created it. We were escorted upstairs without waiting. Another reminder that power rearranges time. The elevator climb felt like a countdown. As the numbers rose, my body remembered old elevators, old corridors, old late nights when I used to believe work was safety. I gripped my bag strap until my knuckles whitened and forced myself to breathe. When the doors opened, the office level was all glass walls and muted carpets, designed to look calm even when people inside were lying. We were led into a conference room that could have been in any corporate tower in America. Long table, screens on the walls, pitcher of water on a polished tray. A view of the city that made Chicago look harmless. Then Ethan walked in. He looked the same. That was the first shock. Same sharp haircut, same tailored suit, same posture that said he expected people to trust him. He had always been handsome in a clean, controlled way, like he'd been sculpted for boardrooms. Even now, he wore confidence like a tailored jacket. For a heartbeat, my brain tried to pull me backward in time. It offered me the version of him I'd loved, the way he used to touch my shoulder in public like it meant something. I crushed that memory before it could soften me. This man had ruined my life with a smile. Ethan's gaze slid over Dominic first, polite, professional. Then it landed on me, and I watched the exact moment recognition hit. It wasn't dramatic. It was a microsecond of blankness, like a screen freezing. His pupils tightened, his jaw went still. Then the mask snapped back into place so smoothly that most people would have missed it. Most people weren't me. He pretended not to know me. I didn't need him to say the words. I could read it in the way his expression turned pleasantly confused, in the way his attention tried to make me smaller without even raising his voice. He treated me like an unfamiliar consultant whose name he'd seen on an email. It was the same tactic that had destroyed me before. Gaslight the room. Make me the problem. Make my existence a misunderstanding. For a split second, heat surged up my neck, and I felt the old humiliation trying to reclaim my tongue. The part of me that wanted to blurt out our history, to force him to look at what he'd done. But I'd prepared for this. I didn't come to win an argument. I came to present proof. So I kept my face calm. I let him pretend. I let the room breathe. Dominic sat across from him, steady, unreadable. He didn't look like a man here to negotiate anymore. He looked like a man here to decide. I opened my folder and began the way I'd planned, with something simple enough that even Ethan's charm couldn't blur it. I didn't call it our relationship. I didn't use emotional language. I framed it as identity and timeline. I placed a photo on the table, face down at first, then turned it over. A launch event. Ethan and me side by side, arms around each other, the company logo behind us. It wasn't romantic. It was professional history captured in a moment he couldn't rewrite without insulting his own image. Ethan's eyes flicked to it and away, like it was a bug he didn't want to acknowledge. I placed another item beside it. A screenshot printed from a cloud backup account, showing a time-stamped file directory with my name attached. Not a story. A digital breadcrumb. Then I moved up the ladder. Technical receipts. I laid out the dataset label I'd found buried in the testing folder. Lake. Effect. 1. I explained it in plain language. A buried internal name that had no reason to exist in Ethan's system, unless the system had been lifted directly from a repository I created. I showed a screenshot of commit history with timestamps, and a device identifier tied to a laptop I still owned. A laptop that had never belonged to Cole Capital. I pointed out a naming convention in the risk threshold function, a defensive habit that wasn't industry standard. I described the breaker logic, the way it slowed trades when signals looked too perfect, the way only a creator would know why that rule existed. Ethan's expression stayed composed. That was his talent. He could sit in the middle of a fire and still look like a man discussing quarterly projections. But I saw the cracks, tiny, but real, the way his fingers tightened on his pen, the way his gaze started darting to Dominic more often. as if Dominic was the real jury. Then I stepped higher. Legal receipts. Dominic slid his own folder forward at that moment. Not dramatic, just precise. He had copies of earlier patent filings, the original versions before alterations. He had metadata analysis showing documents had been edited after submission. He had traces of inventor credits removed and replaced. He had an old partnership agreement version that listed my name in a position Ethan had spent years burying. Those papers didn't care how charming Ethan was. They cared about who signed and when. Ethan's posture shifted, barely. His shoulders lifted like he was bracing. He attempted the next move I'd expected. He tried to make this about my character. He didn't call me a liar outright. He didn't need to. He acted like I was confused, like old employees sometimes got attached to projects and imagined ownership, like people exaggerated connections to powerful men. It was the same script he'd used before, the one that made people nod sympathetically at him while looking at me like I was unstable. I felt my hands go cold. Then I forced myself to move to the final rung. Security and audit receipts. This was where Ethan's confidence finally thinned. I explained, again in plain language, that the system wasn't just stolen, it had been modified. I identified the backdoor condition, the subtle sabotage vector hidden inside what looked like routine safety logic. I described how it could trigger a cascade. False signals, frozen accounts, a collapse that would look like integration failure right when money was moving. I didn't say laundering like a headline. I said it the way you say something in a compliance meeting. The transaction patterns suggested money being cleaned through shell entities and timed liquidity events. Too neat, too choreographed, too safe-looking. I watched Ethan's face. For the first time, the mask didn't fully hold. Fear flashed there, quick as a match strike. Because this wasn't just about him losing credit. This was about him losing control. Ethan tried to pivot, to turn it into a misunderstanding, to suggest he'd been misled by a technical lead, to act like he was the victim of an internal error. I almost laughed, because it was always someone else's fault when his hands were caught. Dominic stayed quiet until that moment. Then he leaned in slightly, and the entire room's temperature changed. He didn't threaten Ethan with violence. He didn't need to. He invoked something colder. Consequence. He made it clear the partnership was dead, effective immediately, not because Dominic was emotional, because the asset chain was contaminated, because the risk exposure was unacceptable, because Dominic's company wouldn't buy stolen goods. And then came the moment Ethan expected to win. Ethan expected Dominic to choose money. He expected Dominic to decide this was too messy, too damaging, too expensive to pursue, and to bury it quietly in exchange for a revised deal. I could see it in the way Ethan watched Dominic's face, waiting for greed to show up, waiting for the familiar betrayal that men like Ethan always believed was inevitable. Instead, Dominic chose his code. Not the law, not the board. His personal rule. No partnership with a betrayer, no empire built on theft, and no harm coming to a mother and child under his protection. I didn't need Dominic to say those exact words. I saw it in the way his eyes hardened. I felt it in the way the air shifted, as if everyone in the room understood a line had been crossed. Dominic signaled to his counsel, and papers slid across the table like a verdict. Notification of termination, notice of investigation, a request for preservation of records. The language was calm, but it was a noose made of legal terms. Ethan's composure finally cracked. Not into shouting, into desperation. He tried to bargain. He tried to soften. He tried to suggest private resolution. He tried to hint at consequences if this went public. I stared at him, and felt something inside me loosen, like a knot finally untying after years. Because for the first time, he wasn't controlling the narrative. He was reacting to it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt shaky. My legs trembled under the table. My heart was still racing. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. I felt seen, not as a sob story, not as a woman who claimed something, as the creator of the work he stole, as the person he tried to erase. When the meeting ended, it didn't end with a slam. It ended with Dominic standing, calm, and the room moving around his decision like water around stone. Ethan remained seated for a second too long, staring at the documents like they were written in a language he'd never learned. I walked out without looking back. In the elevator, my hands finally started shaking again. My breath came fast, and I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool metal wall, fighting the urge to crumble. Dominic stood beside me without touching. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer a speech. He just stayed there, steady, like he understood that sometimes support is just not letting someone fall alone. When the doors opened to the lobby and we stepped into the light, my chest felt hollow in the best way, like something heavy had been removed. I wasn't free yet, but for the first time in a long time, I could imagine what freedom might feel like. And I knew the next chapter wouldn't be about hiding. It would be about rebuilding. It took months for the world to catch up to what happened in that conference room. That's the thing nobody tells you about truth. It's not a lightning strike. It's a slow dawn. It creeps in while you're making coffee, while you're packing lunches, while you're trying to keep your hands from shaking long enough to tie your kids' shoes. The first sign was a headline I saw on my phone one morning while Noah ate cereal at the kitchen table. Not a viral story, not a dramatic takedown, just a clean, factual line in a business section that used careful words. Coal Capital Partnership talks suspended amid compliance review. I stared at it until Noah asked if something was wrong. I told him it was grown-up work stuff and kissed the top of his head, and my voice stayed steady because that's what mothers learn to do. But inside, something unclenched. Weeks later, the language got sharper. Mentions of regulators, mentions of financial crimes units, mentions of preservation of records, and pending inquiries. Ethan didn't get dragged away in handcuffs on camera. Life isn't a movie, and powerful men don't fall fast. But he did start losing the only thing he'd ever truly worshipped: control. Investors pulled back. Partners paused. Journalists asked questions he couldn't charm away. And when people finally start asking questions, they don't stop just because you smile. My name started appearing again. Not in gossip, but in documentation. It began with a quiet email from an attorney representing a patent correction process. My name was listed as an original inventor in an archived filing that had mysteriously been altered. They didn't write apologies. Lawyers rarely do. They wrote process steps, evidence requirements, timelines. I read the email 3 times, then sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palms to my eyes until the sting behind them eased. For 2 years, I'd been living like my own history was a crime scene. Now, piece by piece, it was being rebuilt in public. It wasn't instant. It wasn't perfect. There were still people who looked at me like they remembered the version of the story Ethan had sold them. There were still whispers. There were still old contacts who never reached back out, because admitting they'd believed a lie would have required humility. But the difference was this: I wasn't begging anymore. I had receipts. I had documentation. I had systems that didn't care about charm. I started consulting again in small, careful ways. Not in skyscrapers at first. Not in glossy boardrooms. I worked with a mid-sized firm that needed risk modeling help and didn't ask nosy questions. I did calls from a quiet office with a locked door. I built things slowly, cleanly, with my name attached from the start. I didn't chase revenge. I chased stability. Noah became my North Star in a new way. Not just a reason to survive, but a reason to build something that wouldn't collapse if someone tried to steal it again. He felt the change before I did. The first week we moved out of the safe house and into a new apartment that didn't feel like hiding. Noah started sleeping through the night again. No more waking up confused in a strange room. No more clinging to my shirt like he was afraid I'd disappear. One night, he handed me a drawing. A stick figure of him and a stick figure of me holding hands. A third figure stood a little behind us, taller, drawn with thicker lines. The face wasn't scary. It was serious. Noah told me, in his simple kid way, that the tall one made the bad guys stay away. My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard, because I knew exactly who he meant. Dominic Russo stayed Dominic. He didn't turn into a saint because he cared about me. He didn't pretend his world was soft. He didn't suddenly become the kind of man you'd want a preschool teacher to date. He remained a man with rules. A man who handled problems before they became emergencies. A man who believed in consequence more than forgiveness. A man whose protection came with boundaries, not cages. And that mattered. He didn't ask for ownership. He offered choice. Sometimes the choice was heavy. Sometimes I could feel the weight of his world in the way a car would always be nearby, in the way his security people nodded at me like I was part of a system now. It made me uneasy, because I'd fought too hard to get my life back just to hand it to another powerful man. But Dominic didn't try to shrink me. He pushed me to stand straighter. When I worked late, he didn't scold. He checked in. When I doubted myself, he didn't flatter me. He reminded me what my work was worth, and treated that worth like fact, not opinion. Sophia became the bridge I didn't know I needed. She came over on quiet afternoons with a bag of groceries and small gifts that weren't expensive, just thoughtful. A book Noah would like. A warm scarf she insisted I take. A container of soup that tasted like comfort. She signed with Noah, slow and patient, teaching him simple words. Hello, thank you, I love you. Safe. Watching my son's hands learn language the way mine once had in a classroom made my chest ache in a strange, sweet way. One evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Sophia sat with me in the kitchen while the city hummed outside the window. Her hands moved calmly, and I followed them like they were a story being told softly. She signed something that settled into me and stayed. Family is where people truly listen. Kindness is a power that comes back. I didn't answer right away. My hands hovered, unsure, because that sentence carried so much weight. It carried the restaurant moment that started all of this. It carried the way one small choice to communicate with a deaf woman had cracked my hiding place open. It carried the way Dominic had chosen integrity over money, in a room where Ethan expected me to be sacrificed. It carried the truth I didn't want to admit. I had been trying to survive by shrinking, but kindness had made me visible. And being visible, as terrifying as it was, had saved us. I still have scars. I still check over my shoulder sometimes. I still wake up from dreams where Ethan's voice is calm and my world is collapsing again. Healing isn't a switch. It's a habit you practice until it becomes real. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm a mother who protected her child without disappearing. I'm a woman who got her name back without begging. And I'm someone who learned the hardest lesson the slow way. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like walking into the room that once broke you, holding proof in your hands, and refusing to shrink. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever felt like your life got rewritten without your permission, I want you to remember this: your story is still yours. Even if it takes time, even if you have to rebuild it brick by brick. And if this story hit you anywhere deep, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that they're not powerless, and drop a comment telling me the truth. If you were me, would you have run again to protect your child, or would you have walked straight into the wolf's den and fought for your name?